Done. 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 We're live.
But
We're live.
live. I'm eating pie.
I know you're live eating pie.
Live? You mean like live there?
Mm.
Pretty good pie. And Jesse down in Kalamazoo, by the way, I saw your post about the whole pumpkin pie thing, and the real key, you see, is Ready Whip. If you don't have enough Ready Whip on your pumpkin pie, it's just not the same. Welcome and Thanksgiving weekend. Hope you have a lot of friends coming to visit, or you're going to visit them. We'll set aside the pie just for it. It was a gag, okay? Anyway, but Thanksgiving week is really a good time to start thinking about giving back and thanking people like your clients for their business. Every time I go to a closing, I finish the closing by saying to them, thank you for choosing me for your real estate needs. Thank you for choosing me as your realtor. And I don't ask for a referral. I know that some agents do, but to me, saying thank you to them personally, without asking a referral is very genuine, and it resonates with them. And I think that sometimes we forget that. And being that it's Thanksgiving week, excuse me, I got to get some pie. It's actually very good. And Thanksgiving week is a great time to do that. And what I would ask you all to do, for the sake of your business and of your relationships with your clients, is make a commitment between now and the end of the year, or the first of next year, first part of next year, that you contact every one of your past clients and say thank you. I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for the business that you sent my way in years past, and I just wanted you to know that I appreciate it. So I would encourage you to do that. Today I want to talk a little bit about contracts. I know I've talked about contracts in various ways, and what I want everyone to understand is no matter how many years you've been in this business, I know that there are agents out there who have not fully read the purchase agreement in its entirety and understand it in its entirety. So if you haven't, I would encourage you to take time and read it, because the questions I get very often are clearly the result of agents not understanding the impact, the consequences of the contracts that they are having their clients sign. Today, for example, I got a call from an agent who is now in a battle with another agent regarding the earnest deposit. And the reason that he's involved in this is because the contract didn't stipulate an interest rate that was that part was left blank. So that created a little bit of confusion, a little bit of lack of clarity. And so the listing agent came back and said the buyer didn't exactly get a mortgage denial because this part was blank. And to that extent, it's true. However, the basis on which the offer was made was on a 10% down mortgage. That part was clear. And now, in order to move forward, the buyer would need a 20% down mortgage. That's not what the contract called for. Those weren't the terms of the original purchase agreement. Therefore, now if they're going to have a fight, it's not between the real estate agents. It's between the buyers and sellers. And at that point, we, real estate agents, do not have the power to enforce a contract. Only the courts have. And so my advice to the agent was that your buyer needs to pursue it in small claims court. Ultimately, the only way that we can release an earnest deposit, according to our company policy, is either a mutual release, if we have a mutual release which is fully signed by all parties as to the manner in which the earnest deposit is going to be distributed, or by court judgment, a judgment of the court that says this is where it's going to go. So I encourage you, first of all, never leave blanks in contracts. It ends up very often leaving questions about what was agreed to. And in this particular case, ultimately, it may have to get decided in court how that earnest deposit is going to be dispersed. A lot of times you're going to get situations where buyers are going to be denied a mortgage. And sometimes listing agents who just realize that the deal that they thought they had altogether, that's going down the ball of flames. So they don't take it well. And sometimes they push back and they say, well, that mortgage was denied, but you could get to financing somewhere else. Well, there's nowhere in the purchase agreement that requires that the buyer go somewhere else to find a different mortgage option, and that one mortgage denial letter is sufficient to get that buyer's earnest deposit back. But again, we don't have the right, we don't have the enforcement power to give that earnest deposit out without either a mutual release or a judgment from the court. Another question I get a lot, is changing financing. The original offer was put in as a conventional loan. And somewhere along the way, the conventional loan got changed to FHA. Maybe they didn't have enough cash to bring to closing for a conventional loan, and so they flipped it to an FHA, or they found out that the rate might be lower or something, and so they flip it to an FHA without telling the listing office, and that is an integral part of the purchase agreement. There's just no two ways about it. They can't change financing. A buyer cannot change financing without the seller's approval. They all have agreed to a purchase agreement with a bunch of stuff in it, one part of which is the manner of financing. And so if they change that financing, then by all means, that seller has a right to have a say in it. They have to agree to that. So it can happen very often, and then all of a sudden you're at closing and they go, where did this FHA financing come from? Oh, well, we had to change that, back when. Well, when were you going to tell us? Tell us all about this. And so if the FHA financing gets denied for whatever reason, now you're back at square one. I'm going to go to a question that Julie Reisner has. What about our 15-day letter? The 15-day letter is an option if no mutual release is signed. If the mutual release is going to be unsigned, if there's been an indication from both parties that they are not going to, one of the other of them or both, send out a 15-day letter. The 15-day letter says that if we don't hear from you, if we don't get a response objecting to the disbursement to our client in writing within 15 days, then we will be dispersing the money to our client. Sometimes that works. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time we will get an objection from the other party if in fact they feel entitled to it. If they, for example, if we are working with a buyer and nobody signs a mutual release, and we send out a 15-day letter, more often than not, we're going to get an objection in writing from that seller regarding the disbursement of the EMD. So it's a formal process. It's one step in the resolution of the EMD process that the court requires in order to take it to the next step. Because the first thing they're going to ask in a small claims court is, did you send out a 15-day letter? Did you put them on notice in some form, which would be the 15-day letter? So, Joanna Lasser, we have a question here. On the seller side, I learned that if the interest rate mentioned seems really low and hard to obtain, to counter the offer, writing interest rate to be prevailing. I would tend to agree that you could counter it with some sort of language to say that the buyer agrees that they will accept any interest rate at or near the current average interest rate for 30-year mortgages or something. Interest rate to be prevailing may not be specific enough, although I think it's a step in the right direction. If the interest rate that's specified on a purchase agreement seems artificially low, I would I would question it. I would definitely say to the listing agent or to the buyer's agent, where did you get this interest rate? If they cannot meet this interest rate, this low interest rate, are they willing to accept an interest rate higher than that? Well, if they say yes, well, that's not what the contract says. And again, we have to go back to the contract. So if you get something that looks very, very close to the limit for low interest rates right now, I would certainly question it, and I would probably counter it with something to say that the buyer will accept an interest rate up to, some amount higher than what the average is right now, or a current interest rate. Using phrases like a current interest rate or prevailing is subjective. It is an opinion based on as to what is prevailing or current. So it's better to be specific, a real number, as far as the interest rate is concerned, rather than to use subjective words like prevailing or current interest rates and so on, if you're going to challenge that language in the purchase agreement. I hope that helps. And Joanna's saying that prevailing means just what I said, basically current interest rates. But again, that's a subjective term. And if you know what the current average interest rate is for a 30-year fixed conventional mortgage, then you should put that in there, that the buyer will accept up to maybe a quarter or half a point more than what that current interest rate is in the event, in the possibility that the interest rates may go up a bit. We don't want to lose a deal over a quarter point or half a point interest, frankly. As a listing agent, you don't want that. I know I sound like a little bit of a broken record when I say that when you have questions, I will ask you, what does the contract say? I get a lot of phone calls from agents, and they explain the situation to me. And the situation may be very lengthy and not to the point. And the point is, what does the contract say? The problem is that a lot of agents I know out there haven't read the contract, and they don't know what the contract says. So I encourage you all to take your contracts and read every paragraph. And if you have questions about your contracts, before you fill them in, before you're writing an offer or countering an offer, by all means, give me a call. I'll walk you through it. But the time to do that is probably best done before the contract is written rather than after the contract is written. Speaking of contracts, if you're a member of a team or a team leader, I certainly hope that you have your team contracts in place. And as part of those team contracts, you have very specific language as it regards severance. Once you have a separation of a team member from the team, what happens to the listings or the leads that that team member is currently working? Is there a referral fee to be paid, and are there any exclusions for leads that came in as a result of the team members' own efforts or efforts separate from the team itself? These are all questions that are going to be asked if there is a difference of opinion when the team member leaves the team. Again, we encourage all of the team contracts to have the separation agreement in the original contract so that there's no surprises later. We've had a couple of situations fairly recently where team members, actually from other companies, have come to our companies, and when I ask them, well, what does your team contract say? Sometimes they say, well, we'd never had a team contract. We only had this separation agreement. Well, how did you get to a separation agreement without first having a team contract? That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. As I think I've mentioned before, we are trying to get Gail Anderson in here to, we've not been able to schedule a time that's going to work with her yet, but we're still working on it, to get her in and review how teams can be structured from a legal standpoint, and how they are to operate and stay within the boundaries of the law so that there is not cross-disclosure going on within teams unless we are forced into a dual agency position. Again, we don't want to be in a dual agency position. We, as a company, have taken a position to not become dual agents. Some of those are simply unavoidable. But we're still working on it. Stay tuned. At this point, it's probably going to be in January, and but right now we don't know. What other stuff today? We got a really cool idea for the Con Ed. We're going to keep it a secret for now, but you're really going to want to sign up for the January 30th Con Ed. It should be pretty fun. If you haven't signed up for Broker Sumo, do that. I know that we've got more than half of the agents, I think, have taken care of it, or roughly half of the agents are signed on to Broker Sumo at this point, but there's still plenty of them who aren't. Sidekick, same thing. If you haven't loaded up your picture and loaded up your bio onto Sidekick, do that. It's going to be a great site. It's going to offer CRM for you to be able to stay in constant contact with your past clients and friends and family, whatever, to essentially set up a drip campaign so that you're touching them, once or twice a month and letting them know that you're there here in the real estate business to help them out whenever they're ready. We should be sending out the Christmas party invitation any day now, if we haven't already. Have we sent that out yet? Dom says no.
I
So
don't think so.
Dom is the expert on that. He's saying he's not, but he is. So when you get your Christmas party invitation, please RSVP. We'd love to see you all there, and it's a lot of fun. Do we have any other questions?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. So I'm going to have pie, or maybe just a whipped cream. Yummy.
Oh, the Christmas invite did go out.
The Christmas invite did go out. See, Dom? I told you, Dom.
I was right.
He knows. Title work. I hope you're all reading the Schedule B. I know we've talked about it before. And it's amazing what you find on Schedule Bs that you wouldn't ever imagine. For example, recently we found out that a house which everyone thought was a modular was in fact a manufactured with tie-down straps to the ground, which means that it wasn't really a house. It was personal property, or it is personal property. Well, that resulted in the mortgage lender denying the loan. That's the bottom line. But it also resulted in the buyer saying, I thought I was buying, a piece of real estate, and I'm not. I'm buying a piece of dirt with personal property on it. Like I'm buying a piece of land with a John Deere tractor sitting on top of it. And so that happened to come up as a result of the agent reading the Schedule B in the title work. Another thing we discovered in the title work is an unrecorded easement. If sometimes people grant easements to their neighbor to drive across their land, and apparently this particular property granted an easement to their neighbor to drive across their land some 30 years ago, but they never recorded it. Well, that property that has been driving across their neighbor's land for 30 years is actually a landlocked property. It doesn't have ingress and egress because that easement was never recorded with the county. So now what do? Well, the people who were involved originally have sold, have passed away. Well, ultimately what's going to happen in order for these properties to be sold is that they're going to have a survey done to delineate, to describe that part of the landlocked property or the original parcel. They're going to have to describe that in a survey. So they're going to have a survey done, and then they're going to have a quick claim deed done. And the people who own the property that is being driven across are going to have to essentially quit claim deed that easement or that parcel to the right to cross that to the new buyers. It sounds simple, but when you start to have attorney fees involved, the question becomes, who's going to pay for it? Whose attorney is going to draft it? And that's when it's like my mentor Floyd Whitman used to say, elephants don't bite, it's the little things, like mosquitoes and that. And this is one of those mosquitoes where if you have things like unrecorded easements, or you discover that there is an easement that shows up on a survey for utilities or something like that, you have to deal with it. I mean, you have to find, if the buyer or the seller are previously unaware that those easements existed, well, they didn't go away. In this particular case, it never got recorded. But there was at one point a document giving this parcel permission to drive across their next door neighbor's land. It never got recorded. So the question now is, can that easement be recorded now, or do they have to do a new one? Well, that's a legal question. That's an attorney's question. So we got about 5 minutes left. I have another. This pie, by the way, is really quite good.
Good question.
Hope you're having. Hope you've got some great plans for Thanksgiving. Joanna Lasser. Whoops, wait a minute. Meaning they have to or by choice. Does the owner of the land being driven on have a choice? Well, that's a really good question. If there is a document somewhere that the person who owns the landlocked property, if they have a document somewhere that says that the neighbor whose property is being driven across is granting them the right to cross that property at some point, if they have a document, the likelihood is they can get that recorded, even though it's been many, many years, decades, since it was granted. But that's no guarantee. Some courts will look at that and say this is, too far ago, too many years ago. It was a completely different owner. Wow. Sorry. It's my ringtone. So some judges, some courts will find that that is too long ago. That they will need to have the owner of the property now that is being driven across has to grant a new easement for the person who has the landlocked property, and there may be some costs. That owner may say, you know what, that's going to cost you $5,000, and you have to pay for the attorney fees to have that done. And the survey costs. So it's not cut and dried. So even though it could have been agreed to many, many years ago, doesn't necessarily mean that it would be enforced today if it was not recorded and that it has passed with the warranty deed every year thereafter. We're at about 2 minutes left here, so I'm going to probably call it at this point. Again, Christmas party's coming up. Make sure you come. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're already preparing for Con Ed, January 30th, and get your sidekick page filled in, and that's one of my commitments for this week, to try to get that done myself. So I wish you all a great Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving, and we'll be back here next week. Thanks.